Wildlife officers seized Raja in 2021, and the state maintained the document was neither stamped nor signed by the Forestry Division. The judge found that the seizure was legal under the Wildlife Conservation Act and that the applicants had already filed another case seeking Raja's return, making the judicial review an abusive process. Hadial and Mahavir Singh have been ordered to pay the state's legal costs. Digicel Group has announced the immediate closure of Loop News and the upcoming shutdown of Sportsmax as the company shifts its focus to enterprise services. In a statement, Digicel says Sportsmax will end broadcast on August 8th and that both decisions are part of a strategic repositioning. Group Chief Business Officer Liam Donnelly thanked audiences and staff, saying it was a privilege to serve the region. Loop News launched in 2014 and Sportsmax, on the air since 2002, had become well-known platforms in the Caribbean. Digicel said it will now deepen investments in ICT services, supported by its recent acquisition of Simtai. Senior Attorney Martin George has been charged with grievous sexual assault and indecent assault. The charges were laid on July 8th by Corporal Ashby of the Belmont Police Station following an investigation into a March complaint by a young female attorney. George, 58, was arrested earlier that day and is due to appear before a High Court master on July 9th. The case was supervised by senior officers with input from the Director of Public Prosecutions. Police confirmed that George eventually gave a DNA sample. Evidence, including the victim's clothing, has been sent for forensic testing. Internationally, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the country has suffered its biggest aerial attack to date, with 728 drones and 13 missiles launched by Russia. The strike came just after U.S. President Donald Trump pledged to resume military aid to Ukraine, including Patriot missile systems. Trump, showing growing frustration with Vladimir Putin, said the Russian leader just wants to keep killing people. Meanwhile, Russia reported a Ukrainian drone strike on its Kursk region killed 3 people. Zelensky is currently in Rome for the Ukraine Recovery Conference, where leaders, including Germany's Chancellor, have pledged additional air defense support. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Sure, Michael Small here. This is Talking Point at WSN, the content capital. And of course, those of you who watch our shows, but also at times flip the channel and watch other local stations, would realize that we are the only ones really broadcasting in HD. And speaking about high quality production value, I went to see an advanced screening of Superman last night. I wouldn't be in Trinidad for the most part the weeks after it opens, and a group of friends of mine, we tried to work around my schedule. And watching the film, you could read reviews online, but there are 2 big takeaways. One, it seems as though a lot of print reviews and a lot of video reviews are pointing to a lot of issues with the film. However, the brother of the director, who also wrote the film, he is defending it on the basis of the politics in the film. And there is political messaging in the film. But for the most part, a lot of my issues with it, I enjoyed it, but not because it was that good. There were good moments. But because it had issues as a film. But people want to debate the politics in the film as though that was the crux of the issue. And at times, what happens is, it's almost like if it's human psychology, where you now, who are part of the defending team of the situation, you start to defend what you think critics' issues are. Or you start to defend the criticisms that you hate the most, the criticisms that you disagree with the most, and the criticisms that are easy to defend against, the ones that are obvious bad takes, but you don't address the other criticisms. You don't address the more nuanced criticisms, the more detailed criticisms, the more criticisms that has nothing to do with your politics and your personal opinions and has to do about the merits of the individual situation. And that's how, to some extent, Hollywood was being run for quite a few years. And while there are a lot of people who might want to disagree with me, the proof is in the pudding with regards to the business of Hollywood not necessarily being as successful as it was before. And then when we look at our own various scenarios here in TNT, we see similar psychological decisions, psychological pressures being applied to lead to similar poor choices. One of the things that I spoke about yesterday was the president. She came out to say, well, is it because I'm a woman? Now, to be fair, I do believe, at least initially, if not in its entirety, she presented it in the form of a question. But usually such questions are rhetorical and they are implying or pointing to a theory or a conclusion upon which the speaker more or less is presenting that they agree with, or at least they want to be the key point of the discussion. And maybe even if their conclusion is not cemented in that position, this is the point that they want to put across. Now, the president is defending herself, but she points to the fact that unlike a former distinguished president who just so happened to be male, I did not move from being a cabinet minister one day directly to being president next. I have sometimes allowed myself to wonder whether the difference in my case is that I am one of only 2 women to have been president, and whether the reason that the only other former politician to have become president was spared the attacks that have been visited upon me is that he was male. It makes no difference that I had given up active politics for a full 7 years before I was elected president. Well, first of all, he was president of the Senate, so to some extent, to say that you've given up active politics, I don't think that would technically be correct. Second of all, if you want to say party politics, that's fine, but the problem was you were still in positions that were connected to, because you were appointed by, the political party of whose affiliation you claim you were no longer a part of, which is not something, given the political environment that we're in, is a claim that is believable no matter who makes it. And then, I'm not entirely sure which former male president you're talking about. The only one that comes to mind would be Robinson. I don't think Richards and Carmona were ministers. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I didn't really look into their careers per se, right? But like I said, Carmona and Richards had their critics, had their criticisms. And part of the problem is you want to defend the situation from the point of view about the debate now of being a woman, and if that is the cause of the because apparently she's taken umbrage to someone referring to these senators as the president's senators. Well, technically that started with your predecessor, I would argue, at the very least, in my opinion, from the time of the merit list, because the independent senators took a principled stance of defending the president in that situation. But the problem was the principle was not, let's defend the president because on principle she did the right thing, because technically speaking, no court has decided on this yet, which I think is a shame, but there are legal questions if what she did was even admissible based on the rule of law as to how the merit list was supposed to be handled. Granted, we don't, I mean, to some extent, it's real nitpicking on technicalities. Was the list in her hand? Or did Blissy Prasad never technically reach the president's office or wherever the president physically was to hand the list? She was intercepted at the 11th of the 11th hour by Dr. Rowley and never physically handed it off. But to some extent, she's there. And this is a controversial situation that caused the entire Police Service Commission to collapse over it. Let's not try to downplay that merit list fiasco. And the principle that the independent senators of the time took was to defend the president just because they didn't defend on the merits of the case. They didn't apply principles to the situation to say, no, this is fine. The principle, so in this case, maybe you could say it's more like an ideology. We defend the president because we are the independent senators and she is the president, and that's just what we do. Or maybe in some cases, we have personal relationships, so we defend them because we like them, not because we think they did the right thing. We may not have even looked into the situation with any sort of critical thinking to say whether or not it was correct or not. And that, in part, sets up Christine Kangalu's presidency, not because her predecessor was a woman, but because her predecessor was her predecessor, who also has questions about a lack of independence with regards to the previous administration. Now, ironically, the president, if she was a bit more careful and strategic in her position, at least until her term of office is up, to some extent, she could have positioned herself to be obviously someone who's not going to blindly support the government. And she wants to be judged on the merits of her term of office as president. And ironically, as president, outside of the appointment of her husband and brother as senior counsel, because no matter how much it was deserved, it will always have the window cracked open just a little bit of conflict of interest. And you usually, ethically, try to avoid anything that would even remotely suggest the potential minute possibility of a conflict of interest, if you were a true consummate professional. But our politics, our political environment doesn't require that quite as much. And to some extent, all right, fine. We will go through the motions, we will describe it for what it is, but we're not necessarily saying she needs to be removed. Right? The acknowledgement was, you shouldn't have done it. It's a bad look. We can move on. It wasn't like the meritless situation. And then there were some statements and speeches delivered by the president that I actually respected what she said, how she said it, why she said it. I thought it was a very good example of someone in presidency. But now, ironically, her legacy will probably be more tarnished than anything else, not by the independent senators, because in my opinion, their mistakes are their mistakes, especially given one of the independent senators who was there before she was there, and who, in my mind, is one of the main targets of anyone criticizing the independent bench. Now, we all would ask, why was he still appointed or reappointed by the current president? But I have not even necessarily heard criticisms go beyond just asking the question and saying she shouldn't have done it. Nothing to describe how bad she was for making that decision, how wrong she was, what the potential motivation for making it was, or any sort of speculation with regards to it about reappointing Senator Vieira. Just people disagreeing with it and moving on. She has successfully, in my opinion, not had any actual major controversies directed at her individually, personally. But now she has brought a conversation where she is defending, or at least it seems like she's trying to defend the independent bench by bringing up her presidency and criticism she feels she's getting because she's a woman, which I admitted yesterday, some of which might be true, because whenever someone makes claims like this, just because of the law of averages, there will always be some people who will say the most unnecessary, undeserved, lowbrow, foolish, waste of time, nonsense, bigoted, disparaging, etc., etc. There will always be someone in the corner of the internet, someone in the corner of society saying things of that level. But that doesn't mean that everything is based around that. That doesn't mean that just because some people are criticizing the politics in a movie, that every critic and every bit of criticism is because of the politics in the movie. Some of it is about the movie. And some of it is not about the fact that there's a perceived, by the president herself, dislike of her being president as a woman. And that's why the independent bench is being attacked. Because to some extent, that's what her statements imply. Doesn't necessarily imply it strongly. Doesn't say it directly. It's indirectly. But that's what the debate was about. And now, ironically, she has introduced, of her own volition, more controversy into her tenure, into her time as president. She has introduced more controversy for herself than anyone has done at or towards her. And now the question of her being a woman president and what of that, this is the sad part. Her presidency might actually just boil down to that debate. As someone who says she wants her time as president to be judged on the merits of the work she's done as president, she has introduced a debate that might cause her entire term of office or time in office to be boiled down into the back and forth of did they hate her because she was a woman, and on the gender issue of women in leadership roles, which is not an unworthy issue, but it will overshadow potentially the actual individual and the actual work by the individual. And I do believe she has done more than anyone else to potentially cause that narrative now to overshadow the rest of her career as president, and potentially it will overshadow the rest of her political career. Because she wanted to defend the situation based on what she believed it was about, and not necessarily what was actually just being said up front. Because throughout the entire time, people did question who appoints the independent senators. But to some extent, I never got the sense that it was a get rid of she, get rid of Christine Kangaloo. I got the sense of she was appointed by the PNM. It is what it is. You're not going to escape that. Not in the current political environment we live in, that we exist in, that all politicians, whether they are active in party politics, you're still a politician now, operate in. The government is saying that the attacks on the independent senators are a trend to a dictatorship, which I find is quite funny in a way. I understand on a technical level, they're kind of supposed to say things like that now on issues like this, right? This is a principled stance. They're the independent senators, you're the government. At some point, if the government criticizes the independent bench, depending on how warranted it is, and even if it is unwarranted, you still have to be careful with how you do it, to what extent you do it, what language you use, because then you run It's similar to what I said about you don't even want to risk the appearance of the possibility of the potential of a conflict of interest, so you don't give your husband senior counsel. As the government, you don't want to risk the potential of the possibility of maybe you might be looking to muzzle what should be an institution body within Parliament, the only independent representation in Parliament. You don't want to look as though you're messing like that. So even if you're justified, you have to be very careful with how you do it. And you leave yourself open, legitimately, for the opposition to come after you. It's just that, given how things have gone the last couple of years before the election, I understand the principles of such a stance. You're not supposed to judge a message based on the messenger, but it's hard in this case. It's hard. It's really, really hard to take it seriously, given, let's just say what happened with the merit list interfered with the Office of the Commissioner of Police. The repercussions of that decision and the subsequent follow-up decisions, we are still feeling to this day. Then there's the Auditor General situation. Then there's the questions on the DPP situation. Of course, there's still questions, those repercussions I'm talking about. It's not just with regards to the leadership of the police service and the police executive, and what happened with Brent Thomas, and what happened with the arrest of with Christopher, and the runaway train of crime statistics under her tenure. But also the repercussions on the questions of the independence of the president, the office of the president, under then President Paul Weeks in particular, and the independent bench. So ironically, part of the reason why we're here, part of the reason why we are here, where the PNM is able to complain, and again, on principle, they're supposed to be doing this. The government criticizes the independent bench. At some point, the opposition has to. If they don't, they would be irresponsible. Except the problem is, we got here because of a chain reaction started by that government. The former members of that government are criticizing what is fallout from a decision that they made that then caused the independent bench to be questioned by the population of the country as well as then opposition UNC. And that cloud continues to hang over certain independent senators' heads. So the flip side is, on principle, can the government ignore such things? I don't think so. Because even if they wanted to, the population is not. The population, the people, have questions over these things. And part of the problem as well is, a lot of the times politicians don't want to bring things to resolution because they don't want to face the hard questions. They don't actually want to be transparent because the process of transparency is not easy. There's a saying that I like. I won't begin to say I follow my life by these words, or I live my life following these words, but I do like the saying and believe in it, even though I don't always practice it. Nothing worth doing is ever easy. But particularly in government, there are very, very few times, there will be the exceptions, that the easy thing is the right thing. Every now and then, God will give you a layup, fate will give you a layup, what have you. But for the most part, governing a country is one of the most complex things that any man will be asked to do. And it will have a lot of difficult decisions. And that's fine. But because the decisions are difficult, it compounds the difficulty of transparency. But if you don't try for transparency, if you don't aspire for transparency, if you don't put in effort into transparency, and you act lazily, you leave unresolved situations where the population is left to speculate, and then what do? You complain about the population speculating and being completely off base. Well, the problem is you could say that all you like, but then you lose the election and then what? So bringing up this issue, it's very, very strange where both sides have legitimate points to make. One is more practical, one is more principled, but now the question is, you're leaving it up to the population to try and figure it out. And things like this probably need to be ventilated more, but it won't happen. So what's the flip side to that? Well, this in and of itself, unironically, is a good example of why you have to operate without leaving open the potential of any doubt that there might be the possibility of maybe you could have a conflict of interest. Because that also applies to Senator Vieira and the decisions he's made. It's not about whether or not his motivations behind each individual decision was correct and just and right and true. It is he has allowed himself to be perceived by the general public to be someone who is not independent. And the fallout is what it is. All right. I'll just close this part of the show going to one of the articles. Some political analysts were asked to speak on this topic in the daily newspaper. One was Dr. Vishnu Raghunath. He points to the fact that the president is entitled to her opinion, which is fair. Here's one of the unfortunate things. I don't know if this should be done or not. Dr. Raghunath brings up the question about race. Brings up the question about race with the appointments of the independent senators, I believe. Brings up the fact that complaining about the state boards and the race of the people appointed to the state boards, to some extent, he brings up, I don't know even if this is fair, but he brings up, well, the president set a certain precedent herself. And now, whether rightfully or wrongfully, one political analyst is now introducing race into the equation of this debate. And again, I fear that Christine Kangalu's time as president is going to be derailed, and it's going to literally be ideological politics, women in politics, racial issues in Trinidad and Tobago politics. So, but then another political analyst points to the fact that, look, they're pointing to the potential contradiction of the independent senators who voted or proposed amendments and voted yes on one and voted no when returned to the Senate. And just how I believe certain votes went, currently, some people have questions. Maybe the analysis is wrong. And I would argue it could be a bit nitpicking. But to some extent, and maybe part of the issue is either one, I don't know if the independent bench is doing a good job explaining themselves and their contributions. And two, and this might be a very bad idea, but does the independent bench need a media platform themselves to speak to questions that the public and the media might have outside of Parliament, where they could have a bit more of a direct engagement? Because right now, if the only time they could communicate as members of Parliament is within Parliament, it would always be very indirect and maybe a little bit too clumsy if they wanted to speak to this specific issue, unless, obviously, unless a bill came about it, but I don't think that will actually happen, right? The flip side of that is, do we want our independent senators now to have their own press conferences and to be their own, like, I don't know if they were meant to be that political. But the flip side is it would technically help transparency. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into the daily review. Stay tuned. This is Talk About Another WSN show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention, happening on July 17th to 19th at the Center of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days and NAM Devco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
I'm back here on Talking About the WSND Content Capital, and we have today's daily review. Now, getting some feedback with regards to the Prime Minister's proposed age limit increases. Now, the one that's getting the most attention is drinking. There has been some minor commentary with regards to the gambling, which I find interesting. I'll get into that in a bit. But one of the things that's coming out, and I did kind of speak about this, I think, already in a sense. Now, interestingly enough, the opinions are mixed, right? That's what two different newspapers reported over a couple of days. There are some stakeholders in industries that involve the sale of alcohol, like bar owners, who don't have an issue with this, in part because underage drinkers don't really go to bars, right, from what I understand. A lot of the patrons of bars will be the older crowd. Underage drinkers will be drinking in parties, potentially in certain fetes, but at home. And they would source their alcohol through various means. Now, some of it might be sourced by their parents. And when I say underage drinking, I'm meaning the current situation is under 18. But you know, when the legislation passes, of course, it will be under 21, and to some extent, the consumption habits and where alcohol is consumed and purchased for people under 21 is not too dissimilar for underage drinkers, right? So, and it was pointed out by some of the stakeholders, I believe, connected to maybe the Bar Association, that, you know, there will be shops, rum shops, maybe convenience shops, whatever. Although, I myself haven't necessarily witnessed that per se, but at the end of the day, I do know of the fact that there are parties for young people, and maybe those parties are technically for people 18 and older, but they might not necessarily be carding people. Yeah, I do know nightclubs, because I remember I went out with some cousins of mine who were either 19 or older, right? So they weren't even 18, they were 19 or older, but they were from the States. So they don't have local ID. So they're not thinking to walk with their American ID, right? Because they're traveling abroad. That's point number one. Point number two, the ID they're traveling with is their passports. they're not going to bring their passport to a club. But the point that I bring it up is, the club at one point was like, it's almost like they didn't even want to let them in, because when you're 19, 20, you could maybe not look old, you could look young, right? And they were doing their due diligence. They were asking me questions they had to ask. So I do know that for the larger nightclubs, more professionally run situations, they were careful of that. Let's not forget that whole Akon situation where the underage girl got on stage and it became a whole international thing, and he wrote a song about it, right? She was, I believe, underage, maybe 17 at the time she got into Zen for the concert. I don't know if they didn't go through the motions, or maybe just for certain girls they don't ask. I don't know, because they look mature. I'm not sure. But with regards to drinking, there have been some controls, but to what extent is it universal, and it's consistent, and it's diligent? So certain business chambers are for it. The business chambers are interesting. They kind of vaguely hint at maybe it's not all positive, I believe, right? They did say that the new age restriction should not affect the bottom line of businesses to any great extent, which should be true. The benefits to the country are immense. I don't know if I would say that they are immense. One of the things that they point to is irresponsible driving by people under 25, okay? But how much of that is because of drinking, and how much of that is they were going to be irresponsible anyway? And of course, a lot of this has brought up the debate of mental development before the age of 25. Smoking and drinking could impair it to some degree. To what degree it does, we don't know. I believe a local academic speaking on the topic said it's controversial. It's not like done objectively proven science to say this is what it is. We know it as objective fact. We have measured and observed consistent results that we could quantify to say at this age this happens and at that age that happens. But of course the flip side is there is the perception and there is observable bad outcomes, in part with regards to smoking marijuana, but that leads, as I mentioned before, I believe yesterday, the question, why is marijuana 25 and alcohol 21? Why are they separated? And then who will say marijuana is waste or alcohol is waste? Because if alcohol is waste, why is alcohol 21 and marijuana 25? Just by the way, there was a press conference by technically under the office of the opposition leader, although she didn't speak on it because of what's going on in her personal family life. But Faris Awari did, to some extent, speak on this. I didn't focus my attention on his part, but I did pick up a few points, bringing up with regards to marijuana, the fact that, look, there's a lot of potential here. Hopefully the current government will continue with the PNM did. And I would argue y'all were moving at such a snail's pace. At least that's what it appeared to be, because you don't communicate things. That's ongoing work effectively. I mean, to be fair, so did the THA did something similar, right? Were you actually doing ongoing work to bring an enforcement body with regards to marijuana usage into existence? Because that's part of the problem here. That basically is what other people, not just myself, have come to, the enforcement part of it, right? Because this is, and now we get to the part that also touches on gambling, because there are a couple of people who spoke on it, right? One stakeholder said the proposed age limits met the international benchmark. It might not be a realistic move in Trinidad and Tobago and could cause more harm than good. I don't fully agree with the tone of the statement, but I think on the basic premise of it, I would agree that it can cause, not that it will cause more net harm to the society, but it will potentially cause more harm than the good it does. or not that it will be a big tragedy, but it will potentially not really give us the full benefits that we wanted to give us. He is quoted as saying, "We have a very big illegal trade of the sale of alcohol and gambling in TNT. So all it would do is just take away the customers aged 18 to 21 from the legal law-abiding establishments and businesses, and they will now move to where the illegal trade is." And I think that's even a bigger deal with gambling, because we already have an issue with illegal gambling, and illegal gambling has no real age limit, whereas illegal drinking generally is more, it's already a situation where you're looking at people who are minors anyway, for the most part. The individual goes on to say, "You could go to any shop, parlor, business on the corner and everybody sells alcohol underhand. Also, you would see gambling all over the place with signs saying 1 to 36, and that is illegal gambling. Bars and restaurants are controlled environments with oversight by police, health authorities, customs and excise, etc. So by making this move and taking away this group of people from the controlled environment to the non-controlled environment, which is the illegal trade, you're going to make things worse." Now, and then he goes on to say, with regards to the illegal gambling, they will be turned to illegal gambling. But again, my question is with regards to what extent is young people gambling as big of an issue as young people drinking and underage drinking? I'm not sure. Because one of the things that was being said in another article is you increase the age limit for gambling, you give young people a chance to maybe learn a trade, get a proper career, and then if they want to waste some money in gambling, that's fine. But don't have an 18, 19-year-old, waste whatever little money they could get at that age on gambling and not establish themselves first. But I just have to ask, to what extent do 18, 19-year-olds who have limited financial resources waste that on gambling? I would argue they probably waste it on alcohol, cigarettes, and marijuana. That's just me. And as a member of the public said in one of the daily newspapers, people will drink regardless of whatever. It might make a difference, but nothing big. There are a lot of things with age restrictions, and people do it anyway. So I personally don't think the age limit on drinking is going to make a difference, and I don't think the age limit on smoking marijuana is going to make a difference. But particularly drinking, because with regards to marijuana at least, it might not be as culturally acceptable. But with regards to drinking, it's almost like if it's baked into our culture at this point. It's one of those unspoken cultural things, but it is a thing. Alcohol is seen as a legitimate means of release, of relief, of entertainment. It's almost like I have seen this before in the past, not necessarily about this current scenario, but I've seen it before where there's even a potential sense of entitlement to have alcohol as one of the few things for people to have and enjoy. As though, you have a right to it. Technically, this is not it directly speaking about drinking and driving. Technically, this is not going to do anything about underage drinking or drinking in excess. It's just one of those strange things where when you're trying to regulate something, it's in some ways even harder now. Granted, if you made it illegal like prohibition, the amount of money, illegal money that could be made from it would potentially then cause a parallel contraband trade, like the drug trade, right? That's the argument for legalizing drugs. So you don't necessarily want to do that. It didn't really prove as useful as the proponents hoped. But managing the situation is also difficult. At some point, it's not just because that's a criticism. How are you going to enforce these things for them to have any meaningful value? And the sad part about it is at some point it's not going to be about law enforcement. Law enforcement with regards to underage drinking and smoking weed, and maybe less so with gambling, because again, illegal gambling is not based on age. So to some extent, it's easier to go after that. Trying to deal with age-based things is harder because at some point, to actually track down the illegal drinking, it's going to be so spread out. And a lot of it is going to be done privately, in whatever capacity. I do wonder, though, to what extent do fetes for young people have police officers? And to what extent do those police officers pay attention to who's in the crowd and ask questions, what are their ages? But like I said, it seems as though society, it's baked into our culture. So until society really wants to make changes with regards to that, this law probably is not going to change anything about it. And any hopes that it does, I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible. I don't even know if I want to say it's improbable, but I don't expect it to happen. And right now, the question then is, does the Prime Minister actually expect this to cause or to have any significant impact? And if the answer is no, then this might just be the first time we will apply this phrase to the current administration. It might just be a distraction. Look at what's going on over here, so you don't ask me more questions about WASA and CPEP and the rest over here. All right. There's another story I want to get to before we close out. We got a report from Commonwealth observers from the election. Now, it's interesting because it seems a little bit sensational and extreme, but then I actually remember of things that I heard about the election, and it makes me wonder, though, how effective are reports like this, depending on how they limit what they say and what they're willing to publish. Because the report highlights allegations of bribery, gaps in campaign finance laws, voter disengagement, unequal media access, and underrepresentation of women in parliament. Now, the last part, that's more difficult to deal with, because at what point is it because women were outright denied opportunities, and to what point is it because of other factors? You can't always determine where what line ends where and where the other side of it begins. With regards to allegations of bribery and gaps in campaign finance laws and voter disengagement, to some extent it's easier to measure those things depending on what evidence you have. And therein lies the rub, right? So here we have, and make no mistake, what I believe this report represents is some of our dirty laundry has been observed by observers, international observers from the Commonwealth. You know, some of the very people who not only should have a very good understanding of our system of politics and government, so their analysis will be a bit, not just more accurate, but also they will potentially derive certain conclusions, make certain hypotheses, which would potentially be more accurate than, say, if an American team that may not be as familiar with the Westminster model make certain hypotheses, allegations, etc., conclusions. But the newspaper article says, among the most serious issues flagged were reports of bribery on election day. The Observer Group said it had received accounts of alleged vote buying and other electoral offenses. While specific cases were not detailed in the report, the group urged authorities to promptly investigate and prosecute any violations. It warned that failure to act could undermine public confidence in future elections and called for swift legal action to ensure accountability and deter similar conduct. Here's the thing, to some extent we've had that happen already. But it's just one of those weird things where, because I think even like 2010 or the election before, there were, it could have been the election before 2010, there were allegations. Who has members of various unofficial community organizations to potentially be there to intimidate. In this election, it was who was potentially giving out stuff, right? There was some stuff in social media floating around, I think it was a phone call where certain things were not spoken of in detail because it seemed as though the speaker knew what they were doing was not on the up and up, so they didn't want to incriminate themselves if potentially they were being recorded. I don't know to what extent the phone call was staged. That's always a question you have to ask because this is Trinidad and Tobago. And that was a little bit convenient, but it is what it is. Because it was convenient because if it's a false flag operation, it's actually a lot easier to get away from. You're just kind of throwing hints out there as opposed to you're making definitive claims. But a Commonwealth group has observed this. The consequences, I think, I've already here because we already have situations where different political entities want to complain about the EBC and the sanctity of elections anyway, in part because of certain things that is alleged to have happened in elections gone by. Was anything really done about it? I would argue not enough, if not outright, no, nothing was. Will anything be done about this? I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if anything could be done about this because unfortunately, at best, the arrest of the Commissioner of Police, Hilaire Christopher, brings into doubt the ability of the police service to investigate things like this. And gathering evidence on things like this, if they haven't necessarily done an investigation and gotten evidence already, the longer it goes on, the less likely they'll be able to actually find anything actionable and do anything about it. They also point to the campaign finance rules and point to significant regulatory gaps. Individual candidates are subject to a $50,000 spending cap under the Representation of the People Act. Political parties are not bound by any such limits. They are not required to disclose the sources of their funding or provide audited financial statements. That last part, I think, is the bigger issue. Because with regards to financial limits, then that could basically introduce a system which the bigger players might find ways to manipulate to their advantage. Or, in a rarer case, smaller players might find ways to manipulate to their advantage. But usually, one side of the equation will find a way to manipulate, and there will be people who cannot replicate that, and it will cause an unfair situation, and that's no bueno in politics, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it and that it's a bad idea to look at a lack of spending limits. I'm just saying it's not as simple to say, oh, I think we should put a spending limit, and then you magically get a solution to that will universally work and have no loopholes and no issues, etc., no negative consequences. But with regards to disclosing sources of funding to some sort of regulatory authority and providing audited financial statements, I think that is a bit easier to say, yes, there is far more positives with that if we had those things than negatives. And again, these are Commonwealth observers whom I would imagine come from various countries that at some point we have certain ties to, we would have certain linkages to, we would do certain business with, we would have certain relationships with, that we would rely upon, that are observing these things. But the problem is they are basically speaking to politicians to deal with issues that they observed with politicians. Now, the bribery stuff, there was specific allegations that have not been corroborated or proven or anything else with regards to certain members of the PNM on election day. That much we have heard, but it's rumors and hearsay at this point. But with regards to the election campaign financing situation, that's universal. But as was pointed out on the show, what politician is really going to do anything about campaign finance reform? Because the winners will always be in a position of strength where to them, at least in the moment, in the immediate short term, they would see it more as a detriment to their re-election than as a positive, and thus they will be de-incentivized to do it. The losers will always be incentivized to speak about it because, one, it's an issue that they know the sitting government will never deliver on. And two, because they're losers, they can only benefit from something that will restrict the winner, because they ain't the incumbent. But the moment the tables reverse, I will argue the positions will immediately, automatically flip. And to some extent, I could be wrong. It didn't cost the ENC anything when they were in opposition to speak about campaign finance reform, but now they're in government. Are we going to see it? I don't think so. That said, let's see if anything comes out with it. It's sad that the report did not detail allegations of bribery. And again, it makes me wonder, what are we supposed to do with this if you don't have specifics? And if you can't give us specifics, then we do have to be responsible and ask what your reason for that is. Is it because you yourself don't have specifics? So then how could you level expectations on the authorities of the day to deal with something that there is no specific situation to actually address? And therein lies the weakness of this whole thing. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll switch gears. There was a press conference yesterday. There's one part about it that I want to highlight and talk about. Stay tuned to talk about the WSND content gathering show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days and NAMDevco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
One of the things that I could appreciate is the passion by former Minister of Public Utilities Marvin Gonzalez. I do believe it does, to some extent, get him into trouble just a little bit with regards to how he says what he says over the issue that is the current situation of WASA, the firings of certain individuals from WASA, and the direction WASA is heading in. Because he is taking it personally, which maybe might be the mistake, but his emotions are because, I guess, this is my opinion, he is taking great umbrage with what the current government is doing to the institution, one of the institutions that he worked directly with. Now, there was, I believe, a question-answer segment which he went into a passionate semi-monologue because there weren't that much, he wasn't necessarily answering questions per se, and he was doing most of the talking during that 10 to 12 minutes. But it wasn't necessarily an off-the-rails rant, and he was not necessarily going full out and saying all of what he allegedly knows, but until he tells us what it is, we can't say that he knows anything more or not. But I did find it interesting because of the implications in what he said and how he said it, and then the implications of how potentially he and the PNM will operate moving forward. Not necessarily stuff that I've criticized, but rather the fact that they're not just people who are going to need parliamentary privilege to speak anymore, apparently. For more on what I'm talking about, it's time to cue this.
Executives of WhatsApp, being exported out, and they spoke about the new acting CEO not having the experience, the managerial experience, etc. I see here that he was once the manager of technical services of the wastewater system.
That's a low-level position in the authority. Very, very low level.
I guess that's one of the
he did absolutely
manager's positions.
Yes, the 426. The 426. They're a very low-level position. Absolutely no executive experience. Never even reported to a board on anything under his charge.
He never considered the transmission process to be one of these.
I don't know if he applied, but certainly if he applied, he was deemed not to be suitable because he would have been within that executive structure.
He also telling some NABET and some...
I just want to tell you something. When Minister Padarat, I think you would recall, K. Marie, I think you were at that news conference at Balize House. And I asked a direct question to Minister Padarat. Who is Jevan Joseph? You can go back to your record. He walked into WhatsApp with Mr. Jevan Joseph. And Mr. Jevan Joseph is now the CEO of WhatsApp. You could imagine if I had done something like that. I don't think I would have survived one day in a PNM cabinet had I conducted myself in this way. I would not have survived. Walking into a statutory authority, being accompanied by someone
calling for contracts.
Exactly, calling for contracts to be terminated, calling for this one, calling for that one. And I asked the question in the news conference at Balize House. Can Minister Padarat tell the country who is Mr. Jevan Joseph? And he never answered the question. But I want to also put something here on the table. The millions of dollars that they are going to pay for all of these executives whose contracts they have illegally terminated, they should also take that into consideration. They should also take that into consideration because most of these executives, in my understanding, they had 3-year contracts with the ability to extend to a further 2 years, taking it to approximately 5 years. And their contracts have been terminated within 6 months. Within 6 months. And you know what is their justification for terminating these contracts? Well, the transformation plan was scrapped, and therefore all of these positions are no longer valid. But the transformation plan had a position for CEO. Your current structure, the current structure that they have reverted to, has a position of CEO. So what then is the basis for firing a CEO that has been hired by international best practice to get someone to run a modern utility company? And worse yet, the same salary you paid that you are paying this inexperienced CEO, acting CEO, is the same salary that you paid the CEO that you dismissed. And mind you, that salary was negotiated not with the Ministry of Public Utilities. It was negotiated directly with the CPO. That's the process that you follow. Not even sanctioned by the cabinet. It is negotiated, it is established. All of these positions that you're talking about, we could not have started filling these positions without these positions being sanctioned by the CPO's office. It has to go through the HRAC, the Human Resource Advisory Committee of the cabinet. All of these things, that is a process. And that is the reason why it took that length of time. And then you recruit people who were once, and listen to me, who were once removed from WASA under questionable circumstances. Can you imagine one of these people who were fired by Ganga Singh for corruption? One of these executives removed from WASA because of alleged corrupt activities by one former minister, Ganga Singh, is now within the management of that authority. And if you are fired by Ganga Singh for corruption, then you're no good. But Minister Padarat want to talk about job for the boys and girls. How many of them walk behind him in the election campaign? How many of them are current UNC councillors? Ask the question. One, Jivan Joseph, and there's another one. Go back to the records and ask whether or not this other name is a current UNC councillor. And even if they invoke standing orders in the parliament not to answer questions, and they're allowed to do it, well, then we will go to the public and ask those questions. And I can tell you this much. Before Mr. Halliday was released to take up this position in Trinidad and Tobago, we had to speak to the Prime Minister of Barbados. We had to speak to the Prime Minister of Barbados.
Your permission?
Literally. Because he was performing and he was functioning competently at the authority, and his departure from the Barbados Water Authority would have been a tremendous loss to that authority. And in order to get him to come to Trinidad, certain high-level discussion had to take place between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the government of Barbados. And to see how Mr. Halliday was treated, and 2 days before his dismissal, the same Barry Padarat said that we recruited an incompetent professional from Barbados. Can you all believe that? A minister of government, Barry, who never turned on a standpipe to give people water, perhaps doesn't know what a pipeline look like, recruited a CARICOM water professional after a very transparent and a long process to get him to come to Trinidad. A Barbadian citizen, or a Kittian citizen, worked in the water sector in Barbados, established himself. As a matter of fact, when he was appointed, a lot of water professionals around the world asked me as Minister of Public Utilities, what did we do in Trinidad to attract someone like Mr. Halliday? Because he was being courted by many water authorities around the world. Many water authorities, because of his professionalism, well known in the water sector, not in the region, but around the world. And Minister Padarat, standing in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, placed on Hansard that Mr. Halliday is an incompetent water professional. That is the scandalous nature of some of these ministers in this current government. And we must not have it. We have to defend people who come forward to offer themselves and to offer their professionalism to benefit our citizens, and not allow people like Barry Padarat to stand in Parliament under the cover of parliamentary privilege and desecrate people's name in the way that you're accustomed doing.
I mean, there's a lot here. There was some stuff I had to cut out. There was the remark that maybe the Prime Minister didn't go to the CARICOM meeting because she couldn't necessarily deal with questions by Barbadian Prime Minister Mia Mottley over the firing of Mr. Halliday. Now, I don't know to what extent that's a rhetorical situation. I was kind of meant to be not necessarily a serious critique or a serious hypothesis, so maybe it was. But there's a lot to unpack here with regards to the fact that there are legitimate questions on the current CEO of WASA. Why is he more qualified than the fired CEO of WASA? And then how could you say, here's the thing, I understand Minister Parrott had criticisms, had beliefs on the credentials of the former CEO. But with regards to his job performance, it's not as though he was there to show, bad, good, otherwise. Now, does Minister Parrott have evidence to say when Mr. Halliday was in Barbados, he was bad? Now, granted, Marv Gonzalez is saying no, he was respected highly when he was in Barbados. Now, I haven't necessarily seen anything to corroborate that, but let's just go with it for now. What was the basis to say that the person who was given the job under the PNM, but according to Marvin, had to go through a certain process that was not under the full control of the administration in order to be hired? Now he's fired, and even before this press conference, one of the things that seemed to be very obvious was, when will Mr. Halliday and the outgoing governor of the central bank, when will they sue the state? Because an outgoing governor sued the state already and won. Let's be clear. And where was the due process for the firing? Were all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted? Because the due process for other segments of the government is still ongoing before they even make decisions. All of these things will frame it in a way that makes the government does not look that good. And of course, there are other things, other questions asked by Marv Gonzalez with regards to the other individual whose name I can't remember. Hasn't been impressed a lot, but he did mention two names at that Balziao's press conference a while ago, like about a month ago, right? If that person is questions like that, the answer should be straightforward. Are they not connected to UNC in what way? And then now, the problem is when you're saying that you do based on nepotism, that's why you're taking your time with state board appointments. So asking people to understand that it's going to be a process, that it's going to take some time, that's fine, but why does it look like WASA was rushed? The decisions in WASA was rushed. And then when questions were asked in Parliament, basic questions, you basically use a standing order to not answer those questions. That's one of the things that Marvin addressed that I believe I edited out. That the opposition will, if necessary, or it might be any clip, the opposition, if necessary, will speak in the public sphere if they're essentially being blocked in Parliament. And I would argue, and I have argued, just as how the former minister said, if I did what Minister Parrott did, he doesn't think he would survive. Granted, I don't think it would be that clear-cut that he wouldn't survive, but for the most part, I could see where he would be crucified by it. He might survive, but he would be crucified. The UNC would crucify him. Similarly, if the PNM used a standing order to just not answer questions over the people that they fired, I do imagine the UNC would have crucified them then. Now the question is, to what extent do we judge the message on the messenger? Sometimes you do, but depending the merits of the case, these are legitimate questions, and you're not taking the message and assuming it to be true. Because we do have to acknowledge the messengers are who they are, and they have certain baggage. And they were voted out, for better or worse. But the questions exist. So why not seek the truth to them? It could be that there are great explanations to it. We don't assume the conclusions to the questions. What we should be demanding answers. There's more I could say, including there is a comment that to some extent addresses how the politics in our country is going, that I want to speak about once again. But we do have Digger Martin that's been waiting on the line, so we'll take the call. Good morning, caller, on the air. Caller, good morning.
Good morning, Sean. Digger Martin, inside again. All these questions that Marvin Gonzalez is asking, that is easily gotten. Use what the PNM has continued to do previously. Freedom of information. So all this tralala he's doing, he has to tell us two things. The Lizama issue, that he apparently alleged to identify somebody in a van, and they spent a lot of money, and it was thrown out. And then the other issue is the court sue, the court case in 300,000 that was spent in the UK, that the UK court dismisses out of jurisdiction. Those are critical, badly spent money, hiding corrupt activities. But I don't want to focus on Marvin. I want to focus on a former Attorney General and Minister of Local Governments. I'm reading on a newspaper today. He said the legislation that this government is bringing for the age of marijuana to be 25 years. You know what he said? That's going to be targeting black African youth. That the silly thing is that because you could juxtapose that with the legislation for marijuana tree. Was he doing that to facilitate young African personnel to be smoking marijuana easily in their house? That is such a stupid argument, and he is shooting his toes, and he doesn't understand that. But the more critical issue, my pet peeve, TTPS, we have an issue with a high-profile lawyer, I'm not going to name it, that is in the public domain, and the TTPS has an issue with that to gain confidence from the citizenry. And if you juxtapose that with an Akil Chambers issue, where the TTPS were complicit with managing the whole investigation, the evidence, etc., particularly DNA, because I'm reading a newspaper, the person in question didn't want to go to give DNA, and eventually I think they wanted to get, right. So DNA apparently is critical to this issue. Two things have to happen here. The police have to manage this properly, and the other arm of the judiciary, this has to be done with dispatch quickly. So innocence and guilt will be realized or delivered very, very quick. The other issue is this is a benchmark for the new police commissioner. A high-profile case, how is he going to manage it? Because the Akil Chambers, the whole of the police executive was complicit with the way they manage it. Now, some of the similarities, I defined DNA, etc., and the evidence. It involves a judicial officer. The allegation with the Akil Chambers was also a judicial officer. They say was involved. So here we have something that is parallel, and I'm hoping that the whole system, fraternity, legal, justice, police, manage this case properly. Because the person who leading the investigation, the CPI, is compromised already.
Well, no. She's not leading the investigation. She's overseeing it. Somebody else is technically leading it.
All right.
So I don't know.
You're overseeing it.
Practical questions on her involvement are warranted. Let's put it that way. Are reasonable.
Fair enough. And this is where, if we don't do anything, that is where karma comes in. And I think karma is telling us something that hopefully the TTPS could come out of it, but out of this, their own actions now. I go and have a nice morning.
Caller, thank you. I have some things to say about both of the topics you brought up, but we have another caller. We'll take the call first because they called while you were speaking, so I don't want to wait too long. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I am calling to agree to a large extent with the last caller, and I admire his perseverance at constantly criticizing the police executive, and I want to join that, and I want to say why. Notwithstanding, as he has said, all the issues with the Brent Thomas, with the Akil Chambers, and other issues, because up to a couple of days ago, I read something in the papers about a case involving a police officer with a widow's trying to get justice for her husband that was killed in an accident. And that story, it is so embarrassing. But nonetheless, man, let me give you not matter, sorry, Sean. Let me give my point here that my peeve, the executive of the police service. Noise pollution, Sean. Sean, I want to give you a history of the police executive with noise pollution. As I have said before, I have had a problem since more than 30 years. There are other people I know that have a problem for 20 plus years. No police executive should be continually sending ambassadors out there to tell us, to give us all sorts of explanation and excuses and conflations of the law and all these things, when all they had to do and should have done yesterday, last week, meet with the Attorney General, meet with the legal advisors, and work something out. You all are out there, you all are getting the reports, you all know how much problems citizens are getting from noise. And all you're all doing is making excuses and giving false promises. Is that an executive that we should be proud of? And then you keep telling us, sending your ambassadors out there to tell us, hello, help us, help us. If you see something, say something. That is so embarrassing. And you know, I constantly am amazed at the silence on this issue from our legal minds and our professionals. I have seen in yesterday's papers a bunch of people, medical professionals and some analysts coming out to support the Prime Minister's opinion about what she plans to do about the drinking age and about the age for marijuana. Why were these people so silent when the last government saw it fit to rush to decriminalize this marijuana age limit without being responsible enough to have had workshops, to have made sure that they would have educated, especially parents, especially in certain areas. And let me repeat that, especially in certain areas, about the dangers of using marijuana before the age of 25. No one said anything. Now a lot of them are coming up now and they're saying they support the Prime Minister and find it's a good idea. But these same people also continue to be very silent about this noise pollution. I can't understand it, especially where the medical practitioners are concerned. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, caller. I actually, because I knew you were wanting to speak about noise pollution. I knew you wanted to speak about noise pollution, so I actually had a thought that I will share of what I think the police executive should do and why I don't think they're going to do it. But you kind of already started on the point I was going to make. But we do have another caller waiting, so we'll take the call. And I do have two comments that I will respond to, so don't think I won't respond to you. But first, we'll take the call. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Hi, morning, Sean.
Morning.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. Sean, I must say a very valiant effort by the opposition to embarrass the government of Trinidad and Tobago on the visit of Mr. Narendra Modi. Yes? I would have seen it, you know, that big protest, or supposedly supposed to be big protest that failed miserably. All it did was expose the ethnic war that is taking place in Trinidad and Tobago. Because if you look at the composition of the grouping of the people who were protesting, it will clearly send a message to Mr. Modi for him to interpret one way or the other. Yes? The other thing I am saying to you, Sean, is that the opposition is running like headless chickens. You know, they are irrelevant as we speak. They are very, very irrelevant. I mean, how come Marvin, Mr. Gonzalez could talk about the replacement of the fellow from Wassa, which I support totally. Let us have locals take our money. And this is a man in Wassa. It's not like we bring somebody from somewhere else, and I'm almost certain.
Yeah, but caller, just that doesn't speak to the individual who replaced him, his credentials. Like,
no, but listen,
I can't agree with you on principle there.
I am only hearing one side of the story from Marvin that is blowing this trumpet about Mia Motley and what else. Which country in the world will release their best asset to someone else? Tell me. Does that make sense to you?
You see, the gentleman is not a slave, so at some point you do have to take into consideration his own want to advance his career. I assume he was going to be paid more here because we are a larger situation that has more demands.
Okay, but I am saying to you, if I have a prize asset and the incentive is money, clearly, and as he would have proclaimed that he's respected worldwide, which I do not dispute, I am thinking that Mia Motley and them would have paid him that and keep him there. Is the reasonable thing to do. But I'm only hearing that story from Marvin until we do some research.
Yeah.
And Marvin is the first person who said he doesn't know if you have leaks in the line that you wouldn't get pressure up the hill, you know. And he was in charge of a utility, you know. This gentleman was in charge of a utility. And it's so sad to hear him come on TV and rant and rave. Mr. Marvin and company, the population has rejected you based on your performances. It is as simple as that. So, you know, try to do something meaningful. This bantering all over the place really ain't making no sense. It's becoming a nuisance, for the want of a better word. Because imagine you have Mr. Moody coming and giving us sea ambulances, dialysis machines, laptops, and everything else. I know what the PNM offers: coal pot and bicycles. That's what the PNM offers: coal pot and bicycles. But I tell them, move, let me pass. You know what I say? Yeah, take care of that.
Thank you, caller. No, some of these sentiments that you express, as much as I voice disagreements, I actually heavily agree with some of these sentiments that you either suggested outright or implied. Because while I wouldn't necessarily say it in a way that the opposition is irrelevant, basically, they have done their best to position themselves to be considered irrelevant by a lot of the population. They have done that to themselves, right? And you're right, the people are rejecting the PNM. I said it, I believe, yesterday, the day before. Depending on what they say, it causes some people to laugh at them. Now, I don't necessarily think what Marvin Gonzalez said in the clip that I showed and that part of the press conference, I'll be more willing to go with him on that stuff. But like you, I haven't corroborated anything, I haven't double-checked anything, right? So he's making claims. The flip side to what you're saying on that specific point is, why is it one-sided? Why is it that the government, because this is how the UNC operated in opposition when they were generally, you know, on the better end, right? And the bad parts of the UNC in opposition, the PNM are repeating, if not exceeding. But the good parts are, I have a situation that I am highlighting. I am making claims. I don't always provide all of the evidence or receipts. Fine. But then now you expect that if the government of the day disagrees, where's the defense? And the mistake the PNM made in government was they didn't know how to defend themselves properly, assuming they had a defense. And it allowed the opposition to lambast them over certain issues, partially because some of those issues were not defensible, were undefensible. There was no defense for the PNM. And now we are left to wonder if certain situations that the government is silent on, doesn't speak necessarily enough about, or outright uses standing orders to not answer questions about, if they themselves don't know how to defend themselves because they don't really have a strong case that they could make in defense of the situation. And so one of the things that I did want to say today is the unfortunate reality is that when Marvin speaks these things, he is unfortunately behind the ball. He's working in a disadvantaged position, in part because he himself at times gets too emotional and some of his messaging and phrasing is not on the actual issues in an objective, unemotional manner, detached manner, where it doesn't go into personal insults or any sort of, it doesn't display any sort of personal emotion, because he's taking some of it personally. And while I understand it, expressing it, I think, is a mistake. That's these parts where it's not egregious. Then there are the parts where the opposition is just going off the rails about any and everything and are speaking silliness. And that undermines whatever good points they have to make, which is what I said about the UNC in opposition for years. That they spoke too much about nonsense and the good points got lost in the shuffle. They spoke about everything. They threw everything at the wall, including the kitchen sink, hoping for something to stick, but they made a hole in the wall. PNM is doing the same thing. They're spending too much time trying to speak about any and everything they think they could speak about. But instead of making a concretized argument of this is why things are going wrong, they're poking holes in their own argument because they're acting in a manner that causes a negative emotional response by too much of the public, and that leads to them being rejected outright as opposed to being listened to. Notice some of the best times of the opposition UNC was on the campaign trail when Kamala Persad-Bissessar herself was not necessarily being outright negative, was trying at times to show positivity and constructiveness and bridge building, and people were tuning in because they wanted to hear what she had to say, and then she did not necessarily drive them away with a set of things that cause them to negatively reject her. The opposition is not doing that. The opposition is saying things that are causing, from an already disadvantaged position, disadvantaged by their own making, they're doubling down on that, and people are rejecting them for it because they're doubling down on what people already rejected them for. So then important questions like what Marvin is. Yes, I get it. He asked questions to answer for. I have no issues with anyone bringing it up. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. You have issues that you want Marvin Gonzalez to answer for. That's fine. It's fair. And if he doesn't answer for that, he cannot blame people for holding that against him. But the questions he had over WASA is not limited to PNM. This is what's different compared to other issues that they might bring up, that I might wish they don't speak about things that way. The questions about WASA are legitimate issues that people outside the party of the PNM have, like myself, and I want to get answers for. And it's if Reginald Moore or Com Imbert or Marvin Gonzalez or Fitzgerald Hines went in Parliament, got asked a question and said, standing order, so, I will not answer because I think it's a detriment to the country. They would have been crucified by the public. The UNC wouldn't even have a chance to crucify them. The comment sections on the Parliament channel, Facebook page, and YouTube and whatever would just be littered with criticisms on the PNM just for doing that. Just for doing that. And that's why I said, why are we so willing to be like, oh, the UNC are the good guys? Politics has a morality of its own. They could be the people that we support now. It doesn't mean that everything they do is without fault. Because that's what it means to be the good guys, right? The good guys never do anything wrong. The good guys don't make mistakes. It's not that I'm not saying that they're evil. I'm saying they could be making mistakes. Or they could be doing things that they should answer for. And if they don't, then we have to ask why. I have things to respond to, but I do want to hit some of the comments before I run out of time. Okay, let me see. Okay, let's take the last comment if you can, Master Control. I want to answer the last. Yeah? You don't have that one? All right. Which one you have? Put up one in the comments. Let me start working through some of these comments. Okay, this one. This actually speaks to, I wanted to originally speak about this comment here. I'm not going to read it all out, but basically it's pointing to the fact of the missed opportunities by the previous administration, of what they didn't do with our diversification, of what they didn't do to help with our economic position. Ironically, in theory, I'm not saying that what the PNM was doing with WASA was great and it was correct and it would fix all the problems with WASA. In theory, part of treating with a lot of what you see here is dealing with the excesses of state institutions like public utilities like WASA. So in theory, while it's not going to fix all of this, obviously, restructuring WASA is supposed to help deal with this. You want change, this is change. It's not diversification, but it's in line philosophically in changing how government is run in order to improve that. Right? It's in line. It's not exactly addressing this, but philosophically it's in line. So, ironically, the current administration is saying, oh, there's nothing wrong here, move along. And the thing is, that's on one hand. On the other hand, I understand these points are pertinent. The PNM did not diversify. The PNM did not do certain things. The PNM did not do restructuring in a timely and responsible manner to give us good results, because they closed on the refinery and arguably they should not have kept the refinery closed. But hey, no one ever blamed them of being geniuses. Now, the things that the comment speaks to does not necessarily mean, because, okay, there are merits to that situation and that situation has its specifics. There are other situations. To say now, well, because of that, whatever the UNC said about this other thing, complete and utter nonsense. If you do that, you basically are not dealing with a situation based on the merits to try to come to an objectively good conclusion based off of critical thinking. What you're doing is you're prejudging the situation based on one side of the argument and their baggage, which you can use to inform how you form your opinion, but to totally prejudge your opinion. And I'm not saying this is what the writer of the comment was looking to do, but I'm just using this as an example. To then now want to take this as a reason to say everything they say is nonsense. What you're doing is you're completely prejudging everything that they say, aka you're prejudicing. You're having prejudice against. And I understand why, but you can't then say our conclusions are based off of critical thinking and sound logic based on the details. No, it's based off of assumptions, based off of biases, based off of past behavior in situations that are not directly applicable. Now, with regards to things like, okay, Marvin Gonzalez has things to answer to in WASA, that is partially applicable, but it still doesn't speak to the situation with the CEO, the firing of the CEO, and then the appointment of a new CEO in rather quick fashion. It doesn't speak to those things very well. They don't directly compete. They don't directly contradict. You could criticize Marvin about certain things while listening to what he says and say, hey, you know, Mr. Parat, we would like the answers to those questions too. It's not unreasonable. Those two things can exist at the same time. To use one to try to discredit the other would be prejudging. And it would not necessarily then give us the proper conclusion based off of critical thinking, based off of wanting to get the best accurate technical answer to the situation. All right, let me try and answer some of the other points that the callers started to make. First, there's the whole thing about the legislation on the increasing the age limit on smoking marijuana will target Black African youths. So this is what I think is going on. I think Faisal Ari is basically speaking based on ideologies of how politics goes abroad, where in those ideologies, the implications of what is being said is not always thought through. Because the implication of this statement now that he's making is, are you trying to say that young Afro-Trimegonians smoke more weed than other young people? Because you need to go a step further. This in and of itself is not targeting them. So if you think that they will be the victims to the enforcement of this law more than any other demographic, why? The existence is not the why. The existence is just part of the vehicle to get to the cause that you're saying will happen. So then the why is either young Afro-Trimegonians smoke more than others, or they have to be a follow-up, then law enforcement will be prejudiced against them for whatever way, and then you have to describe what way that will be, why it is nefarious, and so on and so on. That is a harder sell. So you need to spell it out for me, buddy. Now, I haven't necessarily. Who does it target? 97% of the target audience is going to be young Afro-Trinidadian males. What does that mean? Why is that so? And this and the whole Moody thing, and to some extent, whether we like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, the state board thing, and then to a lesser extent, but it's been brought up in the public sphere, the racial mix of the independent senators, all of that points to me, not the actual racial demographics of the independent senators, but because it's now a talking point. All that points to me that racial politics in the country is potentially actually getting worse. Because it wasn't even that big of a deal in the general election campaign, but people are running to it as an issue, whether rightfully or wrongfully. They're running to it as an issue now. Politicians are outright running to it, the public is running to it, and it's happening to some extent on both sides of the aisle, whether the politicians on one side and the supporters on the other, or what have you. And it's making me think that racial politics in the country is actually getting worse. And that goes against everybody winning to some degree. I'm not saying it's the Prime Minister's fault, but I am saying where the situation is getting out of hand. And it might not be fair to attribute it to her, but she is the Prime Minister, so unfortunately, she will be judged in her capacity of how she deals with it. And it might be very unfair, but that is the practical reality of where she might find herself in. So then she needs to ask, to what extent is my side playing its part in whatever fashion to cause this to happen? Because at least that she has a little bit more control over and could try to deal with it there at the first part. I don't think she's part of it, but I could be wrong. By the way, one of the callers said that the PNM rushed decriminalization of marijuana. I believe so, mainly because it seemed to be an incomplete piece of legislation that needs a lot of work, and the Prime Minister's proposals are not going to fix those issues. With regards to noise pollution, this is the point that I want to make, I believe, caller from over. The police executive should do a better job to look into noise pollution completely, detail the issues, and plainly state publicly what they can and can't do, and then say what they will do moving forward to try to deal with the situation based on what they identify as the legal limitations, and they need to say it out on the record. So potentially, if they are wrong, they could be challenged by the public to say, no, your take on this is wrong. They need to say it on the record. What is the framework that they believe they can operate under, and then what will they do within that framework while calling for legislative changes in order to improve the situation. And I don't think they do that because that will come across as political, and no police executive want to rock the boat with the incumbent administration any day. Because everyone want to play ball, because when they retire, they want a board appointment. Or who want to be commissioner, so they had to play ball. Although the current commissioner has like 10 plus years to go, so good luck with that. All right, let's go with the next comment. We have some comments to get through. One way to mitigate the apparent bias of senators chosen by the president is an amendment to the Constitution that allows such appointments to come from the recommendation of NGOs such as the labor business community, the religious organizations, etc., etc. I think labor and business is separate, right? The labor movement's business community, because the business community are the employers, which will then be ratified by the president. Here's the problem with that. It would not necessarily outright solve all the problems with regards, totally mitigate the apparent bias of senators politically. It will, to some extent, insulate them a bit from political bias, right? But not completely, because still the president still has to ratify them. So whatever the perception of bias of the president will be because she is appointed, that will still translate down. More importantly, these suggestions coming from labor movements, business community, religious organizations, whatever, it won't be political bias, but then potentially will be bias for the people who recommended you. Because then now, if you'll be reappointed, whoever recommended you in the first place, you need to not piss them off so they'll re-recommend you. Or put your name back in the hat under their recommendation. So hopefully you will be selected by the president once again. So you will still need, potentially, to ensure you don't piss off the president, but then you'll also need to piss off these other people. So then now you will potentially have biases with regards to certain issues, on biases for the labor movement or the business community or whatever religious organization, etc., etc. You might actually introduce more bias in the system that way than less. I do believe the best thing to do would be on year 3 of an administration, so in the middle of an administration, as far away from any general election as you could get, you then have an election for the president. That will allow the election for the president to be based on the will of the people and not just lumped into the general election and whoever wins the majority in parliament. And then that person appoints independent senators, and they will hopefully be as independent as possible. They will not be tied to any political party. And anybody who has practiced in a political party, in whatever capacity, including President of the Senate, should be disqualified once that they've been in that political party for, I don't know, 10 years. So even President of the Senate 9 years ago, nope. That's my opinion. Next comment. Let's go to the next comment quick. At what age would the Rastafari be allowed to smoke ganja? Since it's a part of their religion, you can't tell them to wait until they're 25. Yes, that's a good question. Somebody brought it up and I thought about it and I was like, whew, that is a dimension I don't think the Prime Minister thought about. But I didn't really think about it further. I don't necessarily know all of the implications. Like, this specific thing is going to push on freedom of religion a lot. Because then now, to what extent do religious practices allow you to go into certain activities, right? Because then, what if I had a religion that says, you know, drinking alcohol is how we worship our God, and we must do so from the age of 6. Will that be allowed? I don't think so. It's an extreme example, but it's kind of to show why, on principle, you can't just allow anything to happen because a religion says it. So, now, this isn't so clear-cut that you say no. Right? Because it's not like you're saying, oh, well, minors should be allowed to smoke weed. You're asking the question, at what age? And there's potentially going to be some pushback because of it. Right? But perhaps also, and this is the thing, ironically, the outcome to this conversation, depending on how far it goes, might not be to affect the law the Prime Minister wants to have. It could affect how the law views religion, what practices will be allowable under the law, and what practices will be protected under the law, and what practices will not. And this could end up, ironically, causing restrictions on Rastafarians with regards to smoking weed, which could then cause a political backlash against the Prime Minister. Let's go on to the next comment. The 2 callers are pure UNC activists. No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Now, I understand why the writer of this comment will write this comment. I very much understand that. The problem is, it works both ways. Emotionally, as human beings, once we agree with something, we have this tendency to say we cannot disagree with the speaker of that thing because we agree with them on this thing, so we have to always, for whatever reason we think this is reasonable logic, we have to always agree with them moving forward. We can't judge their individual arguments based on the individual merits of each individual case. No, we agree with them here. So in order for that agreement to be valid, we have to somehow, it's justified that we must show support for everything that is said across the board. That is wrong. That is just wrong. But that's human nature. That is just human nature, right? We want to use what you did. Think about it. You're in a fight with your significant other. You want to use some other thing that they did wrong in the past, and you introduce it in the argument. You know, we talking about you did a bad job, you didn't do what you had to do, you need to get dinner tonight. Yeah, well, you forgot to do laundry last night. Like, what does that have to do about the current situation? I don't know. That is human nature. Criticisms of the PNM is valid. Outright rejecting them and everything they say is not correct. The perception of them, the hole that they find themselves in, is valid. They did that to themselves, and they continue to do that to themselves. But being prejudiced against the PNM just cause, when you dismiss everything out of hand just cause. You see, when I have criticism of the PNM, it's not because of the PNM. It's because of the baggage that they find that they're carrying, and then also based on their actual current statements and actions in the framework of the past, but not because of the past 100%, and I don't actually consider the context and the framework and the details and the content of what they're saying and doing right now. I use the framework to help inform me on judging what is now. What is now, they're doing a lot of things that I find questionable. So I can't fault the callers for having issues with the PNM speaking, because there is some amount of hypocrisy there. Because like I pointed out, the whole thing about the independent bench technically started with the independent bench protecting a PNM fiasco, controversy is the better way. They were defending indirectly a PNM controversy. That's to me where some of the major criticisms on the independence of the independent bench, that's where it started, at least for me, and my criticisms of the independent bench. Last comment, quick to close out the show. I remember the previous Prime Minister, Dr. Oli, saying a few years ago that he appointed Marvin Gonzalez to the Public Utilities Ministry, and particularly WASA, because he knew nothing about WASA and water distribution and the operations of WASA. It boggles my mind that he is now the expert in WASA and water production. Here's the thing. I understand what you're saying. It's one of those things where it's a philosophy. If you take someone from the institution and you put them in charge of the institution, you're not having that civilian oversight that's going to be concerned with the perspective of the interests of the people, because they will be tied and they will still be beholden and they will still feel loyal to the organization and will seek the interests of the organization. And the reason why that's an issue is, will they do so, the interests of the organization, choose that over the interests of the country? So that's why in certain things you get an outsider to run it. That's why, especially with regards to national security, a lot of national security ministers and secretaries and whatever, the civilian official who's supposed to provide civilian oversight on the military, you don't pick a former military guy, right? That's not like a rule that you must follow, but that's why a lot of times the Secretary of Defense, Minister of Security, whatever, is not necessarily going to be a military guy, right? Again, Roger Alexander is Minister of Homeland Security. There are potential negatives because of that. We're not assuming that the negatives are going to outweigh the positives outright. You know, like anyone else, we will see how he performs his job when he actually does the job. We can't prejudge him. But there is always the risk of someone in his position that he will potentially seek the interests of the members of the TTPS at times over the interests of the general public. I'm not saying that he will do it. I'm saying that anyone in his position with his history will have that question hanging over their heads until they prove what way their judgment will be when you get to a critical decision of that nature. And I don't think we've necessarily had it yet. We had a little bit, but I won't necessarily go so far as to apply that to that scenario. I won't even speak what it is to, right? Now, Marvin Gonzalez is not speaking as an expert in water. Marvin Gonzalez is speaking as a former Minister of Public Utilities. He is speaking from what he knows, because by all accounts, he was involved in his ministry. That's point number one. Point number two, one of the things he's speaking about with regards to the firing of the CEO and the hiring of someone who was very junior in WASA and was never part of the executive has nothing to do with expertise in a water authority or a utility. That's just management. And that's not even advanced management. That's like, some of it is quite basic when you get down to it. What he said at the press conference didn't actually have anything to do with managing water. What it did was, it was about managing a state institution. You could take WASA, you could change it off with the Defense Force, Ministry of Education. You could, if you want, you could put CAL, TSTT. You could put anything there, right? It doesn't matter what it is. The issues he was speaking about was not about water issues and the availability of water and all of that jazz. Although he did bring it up, to be fair to the commentator, he did bring it up with regards to Minister Padarat. So, right, and maybe he shouldn't have, because What they were speaking about was the management of the authority from the government level, of which he was the line minister for the last 5 years. So that should be enough to qualify him. Also, to some extent, what he's saying about the issue, when he takes the emotion out of it and doesn't respond in a defensive or emotional manner, it makes enough reasonable sense that the questions, we can't just dismiss it out of hand. Karen Shishera was Minister of Finance for less than 5 years, I think maybe 3. She is a lawyer by profession. And I respect her opinion on the various situations to do with the economy and how she is able to speak on these topics, in part because she has that experience as Minister of Finance. So she's seen the economic workings of the country, even if it was only for 3 years, from a perspective that most people will never have, because most people will never be Minister of Finance. Most politicians will never be Ministers of Finance, much less the rest of us. And she's not an economist or a businessman, woman by profession. She's a lawyer. Not just a lawyer, but specifically an academic who teaches people to be lawyers. She isn't necessarily much of a practicing lawyer as much as she is a teacher. But I trust her opinion on that. And with regards to Minister Gonzalez, I do believe he was involved enough in massa that when he wants to speak about the transformation plan, who else but the line minister that oversaw that transformation plan to speak about it? So I understand, but this is where you are using the prejudice of a situation. And you need to critically think, what exactly is he speaking about? Is he speaking about Barry Padrat as Minister of Public Utilities and how he's treating with the water supply to the country right now? Or is he speaking about, as a former minister to the current minister, how you are treating with the restructuring of an entity of which, arguably, there have been questions against both sides of the aisle. And we are left in a very distasteful situation, to be honest, when you take it in its totality. Because the PNM took forever and a half to do anything about WASA. And we were asking the question, why is it taking so long? And why are they not communicating then why it's taking so long? So there were similar questions to the PNM. But with the UNC, because of the nature of some of the things that we know they did, because they can't hide it, and the time frame that they did it in, and the fact that the PNM was criticized for a similar situation in the past and faced a lawsuit and lost and had to pay out millions of dollars because of it, it is reasonable to have those same questions for the current administration. And if you are not willing to do so, then you are not speaking from a point of view of objectivity. You agree with the UNC, you voted for them, so you can't disagree with them now, right? They're your team. You're right with your team, you're loyal to your team. The problem is governing a country is not based on loyalty to one's team. Loyalty like that will set you up for disappointment. That's people who, in family situations, nah, we don't want to rock the boat, so just let them abuse you, because we don't want to rock the boat, you know. You know, that's just how your brother is, or your father, or your uncle, or your mother, or your sister, or your cousin. That's just how they are. We know that they're a little bit entitled, but it's not that bad, so just bear with it, because let's keep the peace. And that's how people get abused by their family. Happens all the time. No one just wants to talk about it, because we assume that what we believe to be true and right is always true and right. So we prejudge a situation. And then we're surprised, oh, what happened here? Well, instead of holding people accountable, you just assumed that it's always going to be fine, no matter what. Well, good luck with that. Same criticisms for the other side. All right, I'm way over time. So, thanks to all the callers, thanks to the commentators. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and each other. Stay safe. Never forget, it's nice to be nice, even when we obviously have very different political opinions. And I would argue that I am in a third direction, to be honest, because I criticize everybody. But with that said, stay safe so we can see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. The government proposes raising the legal age for alcohol, marijuana, and gambling. Mechanic murdered in a Ruka garage. 4 arrested, guns seized in police raids. And internationally, Brazil warns U.S. over Trump's tariff threat. Now for the details. The government is moving to raise the legal age for alcohol consumption to 21. And for marijuana use and gambling to 25. Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar announced the proposal at a UNC public meeting in Penal. The move has sparked mixed reactions. Arrive Alive's Sharon Inglefield welcomed the plan, citing research showing the brain continues developing until 25 and linking substance use to road fatalities. Some members of the public agreed. The Maruga resident said 18 is too young for alcohol and suggested raising the marijuana and gambling age to 30. A 19-year-old supermarket worker also supported the higher drinking age, but others were doubtful. Some questioned whether the law would make a real difference, saying people would continue to drink regardless. The proposal is expected to be brought to Parliament for debate. Police are investigating the murder of a 67-year-old mechanic who was found dead in his garage in Aruca on July 8th. Vernon Guichard was discovered with a head wound around 4 p.m. A metal chisel was recovered at the scene. Reports say Guichard had earlier shared a video footage of an intruder on his property. Police have yet to determine a motive and no suspects have been arrested. 4 men have been arrested and a firearm seized following a coordinated overnight police operation in Central and South Trinidad. The Southern Division Task Force conducted the exercise between late July 8th and July 9th. The suspects aged 20 to 36 are from Faizabad and Siparia. The operation targeted priority offenders and was led by senior officers including Senior Superintendent Simon and Superintendent Jai Karan. Investigations are ongoing. Internationally, tensions are rising between Brazil and the United States after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 50% import tax on Brazilian goods. Trump linked the threat to Brazil's treatment of ex-leader Jair Bolsonaro, who faces charges for allegedly trying to overturn the 2022 election. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has responded strongly, vowing to impose equal tariffs on U.S. goods if Washington follows through. Lula emphasized Brazil's sovereignty and rejected Trump's claims, including suggestions that Brazil was censoring U.S. social media platforms. The U.S. is Brazil's second-largest trading partner. Political analysts say the spot would bolster Lula's domestic support. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN. Good day and welcome to this week's episode of Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. I am your host, Rondell Donowa, and once again I'm happy to bring the law and you. Of course, you are watching us on WESN and you can stream us on all social media platforms. Now today we think outside the box. We are speaking about financial issues within Strictly Legal. Now of course, you know, with the advent of the pandemic, a lot of persons would have lost jobs. Some would have gotten severance packages and some would not have. Of course, we have to deal also with your personal financial situation, and this is why today's episode will deal with the importance of personal financial planning. And I have my in-studio guest, Mr. Syed Anthony Bashk. And just a little bit about him, of course, before I introduce him. Now, September is Life Insurance Awareness Month around the globe, and of course, Life Happens Organization. And this is a great time to have this episode. Now, Syed Bashk is a graduate of Naparima College, San Fernando. He has attained his BSc Honours in Information Systems and Management from the University of London. Now, immediately out of university, he joined the financial services insurance profession with the Maritime Financial Group at the age of 22. Now, he is employed for the last 15 years and has won numerous awards. He also achieved the Industry Award, including the Top General Insurance Producer of Trinidad and Tobago in 2014 and 2015. Now, he is the current Assistant General Manager of South Branch of the Maritime Financial Group. He is also, he's also a 13-time life and qualifying member of the prestigious $1 Million Roundtable at a very young age. He's happily married with a beautiful wife and an adorable daughter, and he's a tenor. He is a tenor at the famous Southerners Choir. Of course, that is a choir I'm involved in as well. And he's a public relations officer of the alumni of the Naparima College Association of Past Students. It's a lot to take in, but I have to say it. My brother from very young, Syed Bashk. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Donowa, and thank you very much for having me. Good morning to your viewers, both locally and internationally.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And of course, as I said in the introduction, financial law, many people will ask, well, why are you having a financial program on Strictly Legal? And of course, we encompass everything, and it's important that proper financial planning is done.
Correct. And financial planning really is essential. Most people tend to not think about financial planning, but they normally will go along and go with the punches, as they say. But really, financial planning is critical if you want to accomplish your goals. And part of it really is establishing or identifying your goals and your objectives and really putting a time frame to it. But in any financial plan, you must have different stages. And really, the first stage or the base of your financial plan is your wealth protection. And then you go on to wealth creation, and then you have wealth distribution.
So let's start with the wealth protection.
Good.
What is wealth protection?
So wealth protection really is to make sure that you take care of certain aspects, and one being what you earn. So protecting what you earn, protecting what you own, protecting what you owe, and also those that you love. And that is really your base for your financial plan.
And also the second grouping, financial wealth?
Yes. So that would be wealth creation.
Correct. Yes.
So then you look at investments, then you look at real estate and all of those things. And then you have something called estate planning, which now is the top, which is wealth distribution. And that is exactly what you do as an attorney, which will be preparing wills and so forth.
And of course, we would have had a program previously about estate planning, wills. And I know in the insurance sector as well, you have provisions for estate planning in the insurance sector?
Correct. So dealing with a professional financial advisor, one that is qualified, we are also trained in terms of estate planning and how to guide the client. But then he's referred to somebody like yourself to really get that document done.
Now, in terms of the need for risk mitigation, can you walk us through why that is important, particularly now? I mean, we have COVID-19. Many people are left with their quote-unquote pants down.
Correct. And risk mitigation is really trying to avoid the huge financial loss. And really, insurance is perhaps one of the only ways in which we can mitigate against financial risk. And by that I mean, you are now transferring the risk to an insurance company. And obviously there's a cost attached, but what we refer to in the business, it's cents on the dollar. So you pay a premium for being covered for a huge amount. And again, you can create an estate immediately. So for instance, for a very small premium, the family, in the event that you pass, and even if you pass away by COVID, your family is covered financially. Because at the end of the day, you want to maintain the standard of living, and it's all about income protection as well.
No, why do you think people are afraid of insurance or afraid of insurance agents? Because the minute you hear, I am an insurance agent, they say, nah, I'm good.
Yeah. That is something that we are often trying to change the perception of financial advisors. Now, as it relates to central bank guidelines, all financial advisors must be doing what you call continuous professional development. So all financial advisors attached to all of our companies must be professionally qualified and continuously educated. It might have been rumors, it might have been misconceptions, but at the end of the day, insurance companies are here to pay legitimate claims.
Now tell us, now, I mean, as I said, there's COVID, many persons were not prepared. Is there a drive through your insurance company to ensure that persons gain that life insurance or health insurance in order to protect themselves, particularly now?
Very good question, very good question. COVID-19, in fact, would have revolutionized the insurance industry. We may have been advanced by 5 years in terms of technology. Also from the public's perspective, they are now seeing that death is not only when you reach 90. Death could be at any point in time. It became a point where COVID-19 statistics started to become names. And that is when I think the public realized, oh wait, this could happen to me. Mm-hmm. And insurance companies then took the lead into now having packages where no medicals might be required for a certain amount. You now have e-applications and things that could be done online. You could chat with a financial advisor via Zoom without going in person to meet. So a lot of things have been changed and revolutionized because of COVID-19.
And is it that insurance companies will pay your dependents if you die from COVID?
Yes. Once you are onboarded, meaning once your case has been issued or settled and you are in good health and all of those things at the point of application, you are covered and your family will get the amount that you insured for.
Now, how much insurance does someone really need?
Good. Again, that's a very good question. That is often the case where somebody visits or goes to an insurance company, has a meeting with a financial advisor, and that is where they are now being able to understand how much insurance do I really need, and it is a case-by-case basis. Yes. There are rules of thumb that financial managers use. Some use 10 times your annual income. Some also use 20 times your annual income. It all depends on your responsibilities and depending on your age, etc.
And if you don't have any income, I mean, you're working, let's say, I don't want to make it sound like this, but if you're working, you're a PCPEP, these types of low-income jobs.
Right.
Or even as a janitor.
Good. And then again, it's tailored to every person in Trinidad and Tobago. Once you are employed, no matter your income, you could still be able to afford some level of coverage. And that is what we want to do, to educate the public and to make sure that everybody is covered. I mean, that is one of the only ways. So, a good point is, imagine it's difficult now to run your household on your income. What happens if the income is taken away? It might be, your family would be left almost destitute.
Yes. Let's take a pin. We'll be right back after this break. You're watching Strictly Legal.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days and NAMDEVCO on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Bal Roop Group and Bmobile Business.
My name is Dr. Joanne Williams-Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being.
Give us a call. The Community Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
And we are back. We are speaking about the need for personal financial planning with Mr. Sayak Anthony Bash. Now, before the break, we were speaking about the need for insurance, particularly in light of COVID. Now, tell us, is group insurance also mandatory or recommended?
Good. Group insurance is usually provided by the employer for employees, and it is one line of defense in terms of proper financial planning. I would always advocate for group health or group medical plans, as the case may be, group life plans, but also it is imperative that those employees, those individuals, take the responsibility to plan on their own as well, because you have the possibility of companies closing, you have the possibility of plans not being renewed, and then the employee is left, as they say, in the rain. So it's always proper planning to have a personal plan.
Yeah, no, with the companies closing, I mean, I am doing a current matter with respect to that, particularly when a client of mine died and group insurance would have changed from one person to the next and who's at fault because of duty of care, etc. Now, I want you to stress on that. In terms of when a group closes, what happens to that particular group insurance?
So, for instance, so if a company should close, there are some insurance companies that could provide the benefits, meaning it's portable. So the individual now could start to pay for that coverage. But then there are some plans that are not portable, and then the employee is left without coverage. And the really dangerous thing about that is that imagine an employee who has become critically ill or needs medical care, and now he has no plan to take care of those expenses, and then now no insurance company would want to insure that person because they already have pre-existing conditions. So it really is a dangerous position to be in.
Now, pre-existing conditions, you see, sometimes you don't know you have a pre-existing condition until it's too late. For instance, COVID-19. Right. A lot of persons who would have died not knowing that they had comorbidities. So how can you mitigate? How can an insurance company mitigate for persons who have this pre-existing condition but didn't know?
Well, at the end of the day, it is an application process where you must go through a medical. And the medical and the underwriting of it as well is also important. And underwriters will pick up sometimes or most times if something is wrong with that individual. Or reinsurers may pick it up. And then we then send the client to do further medicals, etc. Or we may even postpone or decline the case. So that is where the underwriting is important.
But then I know, particularly with the group insurance that I'm a part of with the Law Association, right? No underwriting was needed. So basically, you were allowed to sign on to a plan without having medical assessment.
Right.
Is that something that companies do across the board?
Because of your age, perhaps that is why you were not required to do a medical.
I think they said up to 45 or up to 60, but still, it's still quite...
Right. And then too, you will have questions to answer. So once you are honest and truthful in those questions and the answers to those questions, you will be covered.
And let's speak about the self-employed individuals, particularly as attorneys. A lot of attorneys are self-employed, they have their own chambers. Of course, we don't have pension plans because we are not working with companies.
Correct.
Tell us what are some of the investment opportunities with respect to us and pension.
Good. And retirement.
Yeah.
Really, and you know, retirement becomes a hazard if we don't plan for it. You know, there's a quote, and the quote says, you know, the old age is when you are too tired to work and too poor to quit.
I always say I want to retire at 45, 40, but that's almost there. I say 45.
Right? So then it becomes even more important for individuals to plan for their retirement. Now, as self-employed professionals, we may not really retire and stay at home, but we may want to take it a little easier in our later years. But then we need to have a stream of income that will be there for us, and retirement planning. And part of the financial plan or the budget is really we use 10% of your income you should put towards the older you. And into a registered pension plan, because then in that way as well, the government is giving you a 25% tax break up to 50,000 what you put into a registered pension plan.
And this is annuity.
Yes.
Right. So could you explain the steps in terms of what's the difference between the annuity, by registered or unregistered pension plan? I know there's a lot.
Right. Registered means that it's registered with the Board of Inland Revenue, and you will get the tax break. Unregistered is not registered with BIR, but it can also do the same job as a retirement vehicle, but you don't get the tax break. Yeah?
Understood. And so let's say, for instance, you reach the age of 60. How can you now take out of that pension? Access it rather.
Good. Yeah. Once it's a registered pension plan, you will get 25% in a tax-free lump sum, and then you are guaranteed a pension. Some companies have it for 10-year guarantee period, 15-year guarantee period, and even if you extend more than the guarantee period, meaning you live past that 10 or 15 years, you are paid until you die in terms of a pension every month.
And let's go to the business insurance aspect. Tell us more about the need for having business insurance.
Good. Business insurance is also another area in which financial advisors are trained. And by that I mean you have self-employed professionals, you have partnerships, you have corporations, but then you also have key people in those organizations that will need to be protected. Because in the event, let's say, one of the directors pass on, and that director was the key person bringing in revenue into the company, and he passes away, what happens to that revenue stream? It is cut. And that is where insurance could also be used as a vehicle to cover that person and cover the company, so that the company now will be the beneficiary, getting the amount of or the sum assured from the insurance company to now have a lag time, and usually they use 12 months. The lag time there now is to now train and replace somebody else to take over that job.
While you obtain your income, basically.
Whilst the company doesn't suffer in terms of the revenue.
Now, there's a term called, and you can correct me, in terms of liability, particularly with attorneys who may have been negligent for some point, not through no fault of their own, and therefore has to now pay a certain amount of monies to the aggrieved person.
Right.
Are there insurance to protect the attorneys or the office from such liability?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's that, and the word or the term for that rather is professional indemnity.
Yes.
And they doctors, attorneys, engineers, all of the professionals would need to get professional indemnity, especially now when we become a society where everybody will want to sue.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that professional indemnity plan.
Right. So that will really take care of if, as you say, if an aggrieved person and if the practitioner then perhaps does malpractice and goes to court and now they have to pay, then the insurance company or the third party, which is the company, will now come into play to pay that benefit out.
And what are some of what are the examples of those sum assured in terms of how much you can be insured?
It varies. So it's very dynamic. Now you may have instances where, for instance, doctors may have done a surgery and the person passes away, and it might have been negligence, not deliberately, but it might have been negligence, and then the doctor is sued, and then the insurance company now will have to come in to pay the aggrieved person.
And let's say that, for instance, that company is not even assured, the doctor is not insured.
that is then another story. Yeah, that's another story there.
All right, so Siad, we have to take another break. You are watching Strictly Legal. We'll be right back.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention, happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days, and NAMDevco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Balroop Group and Bmobile Business.
And we are back. The importance of personal financial planning with my guest here, Anthony Bash. Now, let's speak about critical illness. What is critical illness?
Good. Now, in years gone by, life insurance was really known as death insurance. Only when you die, then your family would benefit from the sum insured. And, coming down to the later years, then they introduced living benefits onto a life insurance policy, and that being critical illness coverage, which is where you are paid as the person alive if you are diagnosed with a critical illness. And a critical illness meaning cancer, heart attack, stroke, kidney failure, paralysis, major burns, coma, and the list goes on.
Is it that is also including in your life insurance package? Because at least with my insurance, I know that is an element that that has to be included.
Right. So depending on the company, it could either be included or not included. It could be done separately or together with your life insurance program.
Critical illness, how important is critical illness our benefit?
I would tell you it is really important. I was going to say it's critically important, right?
Indeed.
But you see, even yesterday was a really a solemn day. Two individuals who I know personally, under the age of 40, died. One from leukemia and the other from a brain tumor.
My condolences.
And the thing is, they were covered, but was it enough? I don't know. And to really take care of a critical illness and to put things in, like for instance, cancer into remission, it might cost you $1.5 million and up. So people need to really look at what they're being covered in terms of the critical illness and sum assured. $200,000 really can't do much.
Yeah, because the sum assured is really small.
And I'm certain you know of individuals who would have been afflicted with a critical illness and then they ended up having to do a barbecue and a curricue or depend on charity. But we have the tools to really mitigate against that risk of becoming critically ill. Some companies, for instance, like Maritime, we go to age 100. There are some companies as well who have 22 critical illnesses covered and all of those things. So, it really is important that the individual takes the responsibility to meet with a financial advisor.
Yes, and let's broaden the scope in terms of general insurance.
Good.
Tell us, what is general insurance basically?
Good. So general insurance basically deals with your vehicle, your home, your stock in your business, your workman's compensation, public liability. It's a broad scope that is termed general insurance. But for instance, vehicle insurance, it's really to indemnify the client against any loss. And that really means to put you back into the position you were in before, let's say, an accident. So it's not to put you in a better position, it's to put you back in the same position.
The same position regardless of whether, and this is a true situation, regardless of whether someone scratch your bumper or not.
Yeah. And then those things are really, you have companies now that will apply an excess. So let's say the scratch is only at $500, but your excess is $5,000.
Yes.
You now will have to stand that responsibility for that initial amount.
I really don't think people understand that term excess,
Right.
because I think it's too much of a small print, a fine print with insurance companies.
Right, so it's excess or what you could even term as a deductible. Mm-hmm. So the first part of your claim, which sometimes the companies use a percentage of the value of the vehicle.
So if you have a Range Rover, like yourself.
It's a high excess. But then there are some companies as well that have a waiver of excess, so that you could also get that benefit as well, where the excess could be waived and you pay a little extra on your premium for that.
And let's speak about the workmen compensation, because that is relevant to businesses like myself, etc.
Right.
I mean, I know in law what is workmen compensation, but in terms of an insurance aspect.
Right. So workmen's compensation is basically the employer or the company will have this form of coverage in the event an employee should pass away or get damaged on the job. And really you are insuring the person's wages. And there are certain factors and underwriting that will come in to give you a premium based on the occupation, based on the risk that is involved. Because you may have somebody working on a 10-story building. Now, that individual is a different risk than somebody who is working in an office.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed. But of course, you can't deny that the risk is risk.
Correct. And you pay a premium based on the risk.
And then particularly under the health and safety laws and under OSH Act as well.
Correct.
That is important.
And in some cases mandatory.
Yeah.
In most companies who are applying for government tenders and all of those things, they need to have the workmen's comp and also public liability.
Yes, that's what I was now going to say. In terms of public liability, just explain why that insurance is needed.
Right.
Or what is the criteria for public liability?
Well, again,
insurance?
the public liability aspect of it is like, for instance, simply, if somebody should walk in here and they slip and fall, they may sue the owners of this building or the owners of the channel. But if the company, if that person has public liability coverage, now the insurance company will now compensate that individual. Now, and it works in many other areas. That is a simple example for you.
Now, can you stress on the need for retaining a financial advisor and that insurance agents or financial advisors? I think you all have a
good.
It is important rather than being a menace.
Right.
To society.
Good. I agree with you. And through our national body, which is TIFA, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, which all of our financial advisors belong to, right? We are trained, we are continuously trained and developed, and that is where the profession and the professionalism would now be realized by the clients. And gone are the days where you will find an insurance agent calling down your phone and all of those things. We have now transformed into a profession.
That is meat.
And we are professionals, yeah, in our own right.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And before we leave, tell us about your experience as I think it was the youngest qualifier of the $1 Million Round Table, Mr. Bash.
I was in fact the youngest person to be a divisional vice president for the $1 Million Round Table for the Caribbean, which means that I would, similar to like the UN, let's say, I often call MDRT the UN of financial advisors. I was responsible for half of the world, overseeing the MDRT operations, promoting $1 Million Round Table, doing our charitable work, and really helping financial advisors become better financial advisors. And that is what the MDRT responsibility is really to learn, to grow, and to help financial advisors become more professional.
And you have traveled many countries doing this.
Yes.
Tell us where have you traveled? Seychelles.
I have been to Malaysia, I have been to Dubai, I have been to India, I have been a lot of places in North America, South America, and all of those.
So this is nice about things. Taking our monies to
no, at all.
I'm just joking.
Yeah.
So tell us where can we find you? I mean, I know you run a big unit and you're always in the papers, the dailies, and social media, etc.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not promoting your organization, just say, but just yeah.
True. I appreciate the opportunity. So my email address is sbaksh, SBAKSH @maritimefinancial.com.
We put that up on the screen. sbaksh, yeah.
Yeah, @maritimefinancial.com. I'm also on Instagram, on Facebook. And also my cell phone number is public, so it's 759-1489. 759-1489.
And guys, Bash, any closing?
I just want to thank you, Mr. Donovan, for giving me the opportunity to be on your program. I really think that personal financial planning is critical to every single person in Trinidad, no matter your status. You need to plan, and you need to have a professional advisor working with you.
Particularly now in these uncertain times.
Particularly now.
So Mr. Bash said, Anthony Bash, old Naps boy. Thank you so much for joining this Strictly Legal set. I'm most appreciative, and I'm sure persons listening online on the World Wide Web everywhere are appreciative as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donovan, and thank you for WESN for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guys, it's a wrap. You have been watching The Need for Personal Financial Planning on WESN Content Capital Strictly Legal. I am Rondell Donovan saying peace out, God bless, see you next time. Goodbye.
WESN.
Get ready for the biggest business-to-business event of the year. The Trade and Investment Convention happening on July 17th to 19th at the Centre of Excellence in the Koya. Doors open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on business days and 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Consumer Day. Dress code in effect for business days. Park and ride available from Constantine Park and UETGR North Car Park all days and NAMDevco on the 17th and 19th. Sponsored by the Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism, Exim Bank, Balroop Group and Bmobile Business.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.